Welcome to another episode of the BS Podcast, the show that looks at how behavioural change insights are being applied in the wild. Episodes feature renowned behavioural experts across industries and organisations, from management and marketing to policy and public health, and more. Let's dive in and see what all the BS is about. Here's your host from The Behaviourist, Nick Hobson.
Hello, BS listeners, and welcome back to another episode. Today, I am excited to have on Will Leach, CEO of Mindstate Group. After having spent over 20 years into corporate America, Will left PepsiCo in 2012 to chase his dreams of opening a behavioral science-focused marketing research. It's called TriggerPoint. In 2017, Will accidentally found out that he had the basic elements required to write a book, so he did just that. In 2018, he released Marketing to Mindstates. And because of the book's success, he formed a new company called Mindstate Group. And Mindstate Group offers behavioral science tools to help brand managers and planners develop marketing creatives that get people to listen, care, and act. So, Will, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Nick. I'm really excited about today.
And thank you for your patience over the last few months. I think we were scheduled, about 4 times before this to do the show?
Life has gotten in the way.
Yeah, I think a pandemic happened somewhere in there.
One of those things. I heard about something like that. I don't know.
Yeah.
I was driving around the country. I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's right. So I appreciate you coming back for the 5th scheduled time, and 5th time is a charm. So it's really great to have you here. You have a really interesting story, which I think listeners can probably, hear in the brief introduction that I started with. How about we start with that journey of that sort of what was that point when you left corporate America? What did you discover? And this is a common experience, almost like a spiritual, quasi-religious spiritual experience that people have when they come across behavioral economics or behavioral science for the first time. I call them aha Ariely moments. So did you read a book? Did you see a talk? What happened when you had that?
It actually was. I was at a marketing conference in San Francisco called, it was being held by the Institute for the Future. And it was all about persuasion. This was way back in like 2010, I bet. And I was at PepsiCo, classic marketing researcher. I'd never heard of these sciences at all, Nick, never. And at these conferences where they have those illustrators who, as somebody's talking, they kind of illustrate the whole thing. And over the course of an entire conference, you have a wall full of illustrations. And I decided to skip a dinner where the speaker was going to be speaking. I went to go see a buddy of mine from high school. We went out and had a great meal. The next morning I came back and I was just looking at the wall, having coffee. I was looking at that wall and I remember going, what the hell? And I was looking at this illustration. And then above the illustration, the name BJ Fogg was there. And I remember literally with my cup of coffee going like, who is this guy and what is he talking about? All I remembered was how inspired I was, not from his talk. And to this day, I don't know what he said, but from the illustrator telling these concepts about these triggers and motivation. And I brought that back with me to PepsiCo. At the time, I was running a laboratory on shopping behavior. And I brought this idea of, trying to understand, well, what motivates people? What are these triggers? Brought it into that. And I wandered into my very first book. And I'm sure thousands of people have the exact same story, Predictably Irrational. It just changed my life because I'm an economist from my academic background. I never took a psychology class, never took a sociology class. And so people aren't supposed to make decisions based upon emotion in my world. It's cost-benefit analysis. I'm finding utility. I was trying to figure out people's utility. And his concepts were contrary to everything I'd learned in academia. But I kept nodding as I was reading it. It just made sense. And it changed my life. And, 3 years later is when I finally took, the challenge to go start my own company, left corporate America. I loved it too. I loved what I was doing, but I just could not get this stuff out of my head.
And when you were at that point, that juncture, when you were still at PepsiCo, you'd been inspired, you'd come across BJ Fogg's work and Dan Ariely's work, and you couldn't get it out of your head. Was there ever a thought to apply it within Pepsi within PepsiCo? Is your role there? Did you
Yeah.
try? Was there some? Did you meet some sort of obstacles along the way?
Yeah. So just like with anything else in a major corporation, there are always obstacles, and it's not because nobody doesn't want you to succeed. It's because
Hmm.
everybody has such brilliant ideas from every different type of experience possible that it's just hard to get your idea in. I won a very important award in my world, in marketing research. It's called an Explore Award. It's kind of like the equivalent of winning like a Grammy. It's a really big deal in the marketing research field.
Hmm.
So I won this Explore Award. I beat out Microsoft. I beat out a couple of really important companies. And so I was excited. I'm like, oh my, it was behavioral science. I'll talk about that if we get a chance of this experiment that I ran. And I was over the moon. I mean, so I'm up on stage, everything's great. And then about a week later, it's just like anything in corporate America, right? You're always thinking about, or people are planning your next role. And my next role was, okay, well, we're going to send you out to Chicago. We're thinking about it. Will, we want to talk to you about going to work on Quaker oatmeal. And I was just like, I just won this award for behavioral science. And they're talking about me going to work on oatmeal. So so it was like if they would have just let me do what I do or what I want to do, I'd be happy. I want to do price size architecture using behavioral science. I want to do all this great work. And it was
Yeah.
just like anything else. It's like, okay, let's move them on. And I just couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it. So my wife, in fact, the story goes, I was reading during all this time. I'm in bed. It's like 2:30 in the morning. And she leans over and she goes, will you get out of here? And I said, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. She goes, no, just leave Frito-Lay already. She goes, everybody knows you want to go. Just do it already. Because she was working at Frito-Lay, and it's the classic. She kept our income coming. It's the first year of your own business. You don't know what you're doing.
Yeah.
It's terrible. But so she actually encouraged me just to get out because she knew. She was like, you're never going to be happy unless you're doing this stuff. So just go do it already.
Wow. That's a really inspiring story, and I think a lot like what I've had other past guests on the show who've had similar experiences. I always say there's sort of two trajectories into this world that we live in. There's like mine, which is a trained academic and psychologist, and then sold out of the academy and went into practice consulting for behavioral insights and behavioral change. And then there's folks like yourself who've I think it's probably 50-50 now on the show, where you
Wow.
had your own experience as a fill in the blank marketer, market researcher, product development, HR. And in between the years 2008 and 2012, there's
Oh
a
my.
book or there's a talk that's, it's amazing.
I
I
love
love
that.
to hear these stories. And all of a sudden it's just like this aha moment where you go, holy shit,
Yep.
this is so relevant. It's interesting, right? It's almost like on the one hand, it's so relevant. You can see its relevance. You can see its value to your work. And yet it's also super like counterintuitive, or it flies in the face of a lot of assumptions and truths that you took for granted as somebody in that profession. And I think it's the combination of those two things. This is gold,
Yep.
Um, I'm always curious, are there, because it's a selection effect here, there's a selection bias that's at play, and I'm just totally just riffing here on, so bear with me, where like yourself and others I've had on the show and others I've talked to in this field, there's that moment and then they're like, I'm doing this and I'm all in, or they stick within that organization, or they go to an organization that is sort of has the chief behavioral officer role. But those were the folks who were inspired. I wonder, are there any people who, from their respective professions, come across Dan Ariely, read Predictably Irrational, and they're like, this isn't that exciting. I'm going to stick with my market research role and totally ignore all things related to behavioral economics and behavioral science. What do you think? You think there's those folks out there?
I don't know how many there are, but my office mate next door to me, her name is Padmini Sharma. I'm still great friends with her. She was that person. But she came from the agency side where it's all about building equity. And so she got into narrative psychology. And the whole point is if you want people to buy into your brand, it's about building this purpose and building your brand story. And she has a whole great consultancy that does this now. And we used to debate all the time. I was in the next office over. I'm like, no, you don't drive brand preference. Or here's what I would say. I'd say to drive a business, you don't just want to focus just on building brand preference through equity. You have to drive shopper choice through behavioral sciences, behavioral economics. She goes, oh no, that's all garbage.
Yeah.
People need to be drawn into your brand. So yeah, those people exist. And I love her. And we used to have these great debates when I was sitting there at PepsiCo about like what's the best way to grow our brands, and ultimately it ends up being probably a combination. But we used to just steadfast into our point of view. So yeah, those people are out there.
Yeah, and of course they are. Like, who am I to pretend like behavioral science is the panacea? And this has come up again and again, where and even my own mind state, if you will, has
Mhm.
has changed on this. Where I used to think it was the be all end all. I think,
Yep.
and I'm still excited by it, but there is what Jason Collins calls like a certain level of humility and intellectual humility that we applied behavioral scientists have to have, which is to say, we can't assume that our methods and our frameworks and our theories and our thinking is going to solve everything.
Yeah.
There are certain problems and there are certain cases and projects where another approach is a non-behavioral science approach is better suited. But maybe what I think where the real value lies is in that interdisciplinary, that sort of cross collaborative approach between yourself and your former office
Yeah.
mate.
Well, what's funny, Nick, is so years ago, I bought a collection. They're actually, you can't see them, but they're a collection of old textbooks from 1910. It was in like an antique store near my mom out in the Smoky Mountains. And one of them is an economics book. And I look at that economics book and I remember that back then, that was science. That was fact. That's how the economy worked. And now we look at that book and we're like, it's laughable. It's not the way
Hmm.
it works. And I sometimes think about the humility you said. Are my great grandkids going to look at my book and say to themselves, God, they thought they understood how things work, but they were so off. So we got to be we got to have humility. We got to be humble because science evolves, thinking evolves, and things like that. And if you have that humility, actually it helps me, or it's helped me, not focus in on just one social science, because I'm smart enough to realize that you can get so in depth on one social science and think that is the end all be all. And that there's somebody else who has, evolutionary psychology is the one that comes to mind right now, where there's a lot of people out there that say, no, it's all about evolutionary psychology. And they would debate me and they'd have great points about why their theories and their way of doing things are just as legitimate or even better than mine. And I can battle them as well. And probably we're both right and we're both wrong, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And that's the same argument or debate and discussion that happens within the academy as well, and that's why you have different departments, and it makes sense. And so I think it's just a matter of like where does your passion lie for
Yep.
those questions and how you go about answering them. And behavioral science, fortunately for us, is just having its moment.
Mm-hmm.
But there's no sort of march towards truth with a capital T. What my former advisor used to say, there's no such thing as truth, but there's truthiness. And we sort of
Love
we
that.
kind of get there and we approximate it and we get as close as possible, but then it's a moving target. And so I think
Love
that
that.
that humility is important. Very cool. So let's dive with that 12-minute intro. Let's dive into the model, if you will. And I really like it. And we were talking offline about this. So in the book, Marketing to Mindstates, when I was first reading it over the summer, um, I to be honest, I was expecting the typical behavioral economics, behavioral science, lay friendly business book, which is here's our cognitive biases, here's our heuristics, and here's a list of them, and here's what we can do to sort of incorporate them into the practice of, in this case, marketing. And so that's what I expected, and I judged a book by its cover, if you will. And then when I opened the book and soon found that you were starting to talk almost right off the bat about motivation and, in particular, regulatory fit and regulatory approach. Um, so, how did you get to that point? And it surprised me. It pleasantly surprised me. How did you get to that point? What's the story behind that? Sort of the focus on motivation. And for listeners who aren't familiar with Tori Higgins' work and others, could you explain a little bit about what that is? And then we'll get into the nitty gritty.
Yeah, you got it. So first off, remember, I was not a trained social psychologist or anything else. I was an economist, and I went into the field of marketing research, and I kind of wandered into this space. So when I read Dan Ariely's book, it explained a lot to me, anyways, of why people decide. But here's what I worked in the real world. I worked in a chip aisle, and I compete against other chip companies. And so let's say, for instance, we do some sort of if you looked at something like, say, scarcity effect in an aisle, and it'd say maybe limit two per person, whatever. Well, if my competitor had limit two per person, we're both using the exact same cognitive heuristic. So what makes one win over the other? And that was a question, and I had to decide to figure that out. Now, the classic thing was, well, your brand stands for more things. Like, that's why you're like, oh, but well, if you have the same heuristic, so then they should kind of basically negate each other. Why would I choose Frito-Lay Lay's versus a competitor's, hers? That's when I started looking at the world. I said, well, it must be your brand. But it was actually in a, do you guys have Home Depots?
Yep.
Okay, you got Home Depot.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. My
Home
favorite
Depot.
store.
Yeah. So, of course it is. You have the shirt to match. It's perfect.
Yeah, that's right. Listeners can't see my shirt, but it looked like I just stumbled out of the woods and I cut down a tree, which is hilarious because I'm not like that at all. But
That's
anyways,
So I just bought a house, and I was looking at, I don't want to sound like everything is like these moments in time, but I remember thinking, I was looking at sprinkler heads. So I had to get a sprinkler head, and I started thinking to myself, so they both have the same price. And I was like, what would make me choose one sprinkler head over another? They're both the same. I don't have any equity. I don't know any freaking, there's no purpose behind a sprinkler head company that evolve or that matches my heart or whatever. I was like, how do I decide one sprinkler head over another? And they both basically, you turn them around and you're like, they basically tell you the exact same thing. They're both plastic. They're basically priced the same. And for me, I started thinking, if I have no understanding of these two brands, it has to be something beyond equity. That's when I started thinking, well, what if there are cues on the box that make me prefer one over the other? And that thought was like, well, then there's something motivating me to somehow choose one or the other, whether it's a color, the word, something. That brought me into motivational psychology. So I started reading a ton of motivational psychology. Very quickly, you run into and that's one part of my model, right? Is motivations. Then I started thinking, well, I can be motivated, but why is it that, what am I motivating for? Right. And that's where I got into goal theory. We'll get into the nitty gritty goal theory, but goal theory is helping me understand, where do my behaviors, like, what do I want to go achieve or what I want to go reach? Then I get into regulatory fit, which was Higgins stuff. I said, okay, so let's say if I'm motivated to take an action and my goal is the action I want to go take, how do I lower friction? Because even though I get excited about goals, we all have lots of goals and we get motivated on January 1st to go lose weight. And yet a bunch of us don't lose weight. Why is that? Well, it's because there's friction somewhere in the process. In marketing, I think that's no different. I start reading a website or I start looking at a print ad. I'm motivated. It's telling me the goals that I have. It's reiterating how important this goal is. But why do I stop reading? I started thinking there must be friction in the words, something that the copywriter or maybe the creative director put on that package, put in that print ad that made me just kind of get uninspired. And that's where I ran into Tori Higgins' work around regulatory focus. And for anybody who, most of your listeners, I'm sure, are going to know a lot about this, but the common way of thinking about regulatory focus is that we seek to either maximize gains or minimize losses. We seek to reduce risk or maximize our potential in going after one of our goals. And so I kept thinking to myself, how, and what his work does is it says that we tend to gravitate towards copy and visuals that feel intuitive to the natural approach, regulatory approach, the natural regulatory approach that we that we're under when we're going to make a decision. And so I kept thinking to myself, well, if I'm seeking to minimize loss, then the way you should frame up the brand on that sprinkler head company, right, would be very different. You talk about the benefits of we won't waste water. Oh, okay. Well, if I'm about minimizing waste, minimization of bad things, then that makes sense to me. Take the exact same goal. I want to water my lawn. The exact same motivation. I want to have the best lawn going. I'm in achievement motivation. Then if I'm in the other regulatory state, which is promotion, I may be about, you may want to talk about how I get maximum reach of water across the lawn. That would speak to me differently. And it was through this kind of my pathway to get to this model that I came up with. I was lucky that I didn't study just one social science, because I kept asking these questions of myself and I wasn't inhibited by things that, that I may have studied too long. I just would ask the question. I'd go talk to a couple of people. I'd go read a bunch of books, and somehow something in the social sciences, whether it's Tori Higgins' work in regulatory approach or, Desi and Ryan on motivational psychology, would solve that problem for me. And so once I kind of got all these four social sciences, which goal theory starts off in my model, then motivations, motivational psychology, then regulatory fit theory, and then ultimately cognitive heuristics, which are these things, these triggers that I integrate into my marketing. then I felt like I had a pretty comprehensive model. It's not the end all be all, but it's pretty comprehensive as it relates to helping people design better marketing creative.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. I really like it, and I wish there was more of that style of social psychology and goal theory, out there in practice. But I think it's just a matter of time, and it's a matter of sort of like books like yours and work that you do to get it out there to the masses, so that people. And you said like your listeners will probably be familiar. I don't think they will, to be honest. Like this is the first time, and I'm coming up to a 1-year anniversary of the show, and we're discussing goal theory and certainly Higgins' work on regulatory fit for the first time. So I think it's very cutting edge in our world, whereas in academia it's like a very tried and true, very robust set of principles. And I love if you can apply that framework and that thinking to something so trivial and mundane as sprinkler heads, then I mean it's gold. And so here's another, maybe if you will, just another example that's equally as in the same space and equally as trivial as sprinkler heads is fertilizer. So if you had fertilizer, and I'm sure this is probably the case, and I'm just totally off the top of my head here, a person. So speaking of regulatory fit, if let's say I am promotion mindset. So I want to maximize my gains. And let's say you are prevention. So you want to minimize your losses. What will sort of resonate with me more on an intuitive level is if the packaging and the copy and all the things that on that bag of fertilizer says you're going to have the greenest lawn in the neighborhood. Whereas your bag of fertilizer that's going to fit with your style of prevention is you're not going to have any, like, I don't know what, any burnt brown spots. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And that it's such a simple reframe of the same underlying motivation, as you say, that is driving consumer preference and ultimately consumer buying behavior. Yeah.
So let me give you a very simple example of one that I did at PepsiCo, and it was coupons. So and it was literally using one word to change the regulatory focus, but it made a massive, in fact, a 200% increase in coupon redemptions. And it was after I read Tori Higgins' work. So classic coupons would say, save $1, buy this thing, save $1. It's always the classic coupon. Well, we were doing coupons for new innovations. And when I thought about Tori Higgins' work, if you want to get somebody to be more, kind of excited about something new and innovation, you want to hopefully place them into a promotion regulatory focus. You want to get them to seek to maximize gains, new experiences, things like that. And I kept looking at this coupon that says save $1, save $1, save. And that word save to me is the wrong copy. Mm-hmm. So I went and I talked to legal about this. I was like, I want to change this one coupon, rather than save $1. Can we just say get $1 in very small fonts off? And they were like, they didn't like it. Like, nobody does that. I'm like, no, but we're trying to drive innovation, and our coupon redemption is horrible on these innovations. And so they let me do it. A/B tested it, and we got a 200% increase on coupon redemption just by changing a word from save $1 to get. And I know, I'm sure there's other factors. I'm not stupid enough to think that all of that is going on. But in my head, I'm thinking to myself, words, little small tweaks, just by using Tori Higgins' one thing could have made a pretty lasting difference in that. So that it's to your point, it's just it's funny you said that nobody uses it, because I go to my courses, or I go to my clients, and that's one of the first things I talk about. Like, let's just look at the way you're writing your copy, and let's determine whether or not you're using both focuses interchangeably. Maybe you should, maybe you don't. I think I could debate you on that, whether you should use only one or two, but let's just make sure you know what you're doing, And so it's one of the fastest things you can do right now today. Just start making changes in your creative. And maybe you're right. Like, many people don't know you can do this.
No. And I even think in like product development and in the app world, let's imagine you have an app, and in the onboarding process, you're getting to learn, your user, and there's some validated psychometric tools, and in that set of questionnaires during onboarding, you assess regulatory fit, so to determine whether they're promotion or prevention. And then depending on that, they're sort of funneled into a different version of the app, which in the copy is going to, quote unquote, speak to them. So if they're more promotion focused, it's going to be about maximizing their gains in whatever the app is doing. And if they're prevention focused, then it's about minimizing losses. Imagine the improvements in churn and click-through rate and all the, like, there's just so many applications that I can see here. So yeah, it's a wonderful thing. And if you can, just to sort of, and then we'll pivot to a different topic. In the book, you have a picture of your son, Nicholas. Yeah.
Yep.
Strong name. And you talk about his disdain for vegetables and just sort of promotion versus prevention focused. And I hope you don't mind me asking this, just because my 2.5-year-old is the world's worst eater, and she hates all things fruit and vegetables. So can you tell listeners what is your son's motivational style and versus say yours as his father, and how does that fit in?
So we know that we have natural kind of tendencies. I tend to be more prevention in life, just in life in general. I tend to be a little more risk adverse in the things that I do and the things that I eat. My son Nicholas is more promotion. He seeks maximizing gains. He's the kid you want to bribe, which I'm all for bribing. I think behavioral sciences suggest that you should be bribing your children if they are promotion focused. So he's never liked vegetables. And when he was a kid, we're trying to, I'm a behavioral scientist. I studied him, right? I know who he is. And I used to say, we have to find the path of least resistance, because he would dig in just like any little kid. He'll dig in. And I thought to myself, here are things. And I actually created these kind of tools, if you will, to get him to eat veggies. And so he's promotion. So he seeks to maximize gains. So I focus him in on first ice cream. And we talk a lot about what type of ice cream do you want. We talk about, if you make a happy plate, you will get ice cream at the end of your dinner. And for those of you who don't know what a happy plate is, I found out it's very Southern, by the way. I didn't realize it's a very Southern happy plate thing. A happy plate is a plate that has no vegetables. So we had this game. He'd go, Dad, is it a happy plate? Not yet. And so I wouldn't focus him on the veggies. I'd focus him on the end outcome, which was, a happy plate, you get ice cream. Second thing I used to do with him is talk about how, I would actually have him take the ice cream actually out of the freezer door and then hold it. It's a little bit of these ice cream cups and make him hold it. Cause I wanted him to see it, look at it, touch it. And then I would make him put it back in. I'm a terrible dad. But make him close that freezer door, because I wanted that visceral, like, I want that ice cream so bad. And then, so when I did that, he'd be more likely to eat ice cream. The counter was where the part I like about in the book is I said, but I could have done another thing. I could have said, Nicholas, you will not leave the table unless you eat your vegetables. Well, in his world, that means that if I hold out, I may not have to take a bath. And if I really hold out, I may not have to go to bed. And if I really am hardcore, I may not have to go to preschool in the morning. So for him, that was the wrong approach. The upside was great if he held out on that. And so, in the book, I come up through some different examples outside of that. But the idea was, I always say, I teach this my students all the time. I said, could I have beaten him into the ground and forced him to eat vegetables by making him not get up out of his seat? I could have. But why would I do that if I knew the path of least resistance was to focus him on maximizing the chances of him gaining that ice cream that he really wanted? And by doing that, we both win. He gets his ice cream, I get him to eat his vegetables, and we have a happier family. So I do a couple of those types of things in the book of explaining how I kind of use these things to my own advantage. Because the book, even though it's marketing to Mindstates, Nick, if you look at it from a behavioral science perspective, it's just a human model. You can use this in selling, you can use it in your marriage, you can use it in management, everything else. And so I try to bring examples like Nick just to make sure my readers who have no idea how to use this stuff can apply it, in their own life and eventually into their work.
And it's a great example, and thank you for sharing that, because it's the same, like you said, same psychology. It just applied to whichever domain: marketing, parenting, and if you can convince a stubborn little kid like mine, I'm calling mine stubborn, not yours, but yeah, with food.
Mine manipulates, man. He's a manipulator.
They're smart, aren't they? They're smart little creatures. So if you can do that to a 2-year-old, 3-year-old, or however old they are, then by damn, you can move the needle on people's buying decisions and
you
and
too can create $1 million brand or $1 billion brand. That's right.
Yeah, exactly. So it applies to parenting, listeners, for those parents who are listening in as well. Very good. So towards the end, as you start of the book, as you start to it's you've unpacked it and you've discussed all these ideas, and then you sort of get into the meat, if you will, of applying it. And you on some point you talk about the 18 mind state profiles.
Yep.
Can you give, the list all 18, but can you just give maybe a couple examples and how they're sort of those two features are interacting and crossing over, mapping onto one another to create those 18?
Yep.
And then if you can maybe walk through one and what that might look like.
You got it. So, the book lays out a 4-part model: people's goals, motivations, their regulatory approach, and then these cognitive heuristics. A mind state is really those two middle buckets. It's somebody's motivation at a moment of decision, right? So, what my job is to do is communicate that it's also just as effective to create marketing to moments in time than to some sort of a personality trait or a segmentation. That's what a mind state is. A mind state has a motivation tied to it and the regulatory focus. In my book, there are 9 core motivations that I believe drive the vast majority of human behaviors. And it's all based upon maybe Desi and Ryan's work, or even Maslow: security, achievement, competence, empowerment. So there's 9 of these motivations, and you have 2 approaches: promotion, regulatory fit, or regulatory approach, or prevention. So that's how I come up with the 18 total. 9 motivations times 2. So an example would be you're in the cautious achievement mind state. That would mean that you're driven in that moment to be an achiever and desire success, but you do it in a way to minimize losses or risks. So you believe that the best way for you to reach your goals are to minimize anything that could cause you to stumble under your path of reaching your goal. So if you were, let's go back to our sprinkler company, right? In this case, you desire the greatest green lawn, and the best way to do that is to eliminate anything that can make it brown. That's why you chose that fertilizer. So that's called the cautious achievement mind state. There's also an optimistic achievement mind state. Same motivation, achievement, but you're swinging for the fences. So you want more fertilizer, you want greater green, right? So every one of these motivations has either an optimistic, I call it optimistic, you would know it as promotion, regulatory approach, or cautious. And I use those words just because promotion, prevention doesn't mean a lot to my clients.
Academics are the worst when it comes to naming things. I can attest to that.
Especially the word promotion, because in my world for consumer packaged goods, every time you say promotion, people think coupon. It's a promotion.
Yeah.
And so I've literally had clients say, stop using that word, because, and I didn't know what else to call them. Like, it's so clear in my mind what we mean, but in their world, a promotion is I'm offering 2 for 1. So I had to come up with the word optimistic versus cautious. So
much better.
Yeah, it helps my clients. It helps me kind of sell more books to make it more relatable.
Yes.
So there are these 18 mind states. There's cautious achievement, optimistic achievement. There's cautious security, optimistic security. There's cautious empowerment, optimistic empowerment. You get to all 18 that way. And here is my issue. So I was back at PepsiCo, and we had cultural anthropologists. I had neuroscientists on staff at one point. I mean, we threw money at research like none other. It's an amazing company. The problem with all this deep psychological stuff is that our clients are brand managers who are, often from MBA programs, the highest MBA programs you can go to, and they may have taken a consumer behavior course, maybe. And then you go and you take these same insights over to creative groups, and those creative groups may have gone to art institutes, design schools, where maybe they took a consumer behavior class. And so the vast majority of all the things that we are talking about from an insights perspective were being lost. And so I would go through a 30-page deck on, my version of a mind state back then, and you would have a creative director go, "Man, I love that social proof idea." Like, that's it? That's all you took away from this? And so they'd run off with social proof. And I'm thinking, no, there's so much more. So I had to figure out a translation. I had to figure out a translation that made sense to marketing. That's where we do these blueprints. Or, a lot of people are doing these now, right? I've got blueprints. Some people have playbooks. But it's the idea is rather than trying to educate marketers and trying to educate creative directors on how do you take these ideas and put them into your world, let me just create the bridge. And it's not the perfect bridge, and I'm constantly changing the bridge. But the bridge starts off with, a persona. I call it just an overlay, but it just gives you a moment. It gives you a sense of, in that moment in time, what's happening in this person's head. So regardless of personality type, because a mind state is not a personality type, it's not a segmentation, it's a moment in time, and it's an overlay that you place that helps you understand what's happening to this person in this moment in time that could influence those attitudes, those beliefs, that personality. And so I start off with a persona, and then you just work your way down from the persona to eventually get into creative strategy, all the way down to brand strategy, all the way down to actual tactics at the back end of these things. Where I may in here talk about dilating the pupils of the lead model in a piece of creative, because by doing that I can give a psychological sense of reciprocity. Now, I'm not trying to force any creative into, you have to dilate pupils in the lead model's eyes. What I am trying to do is say, see how I brought this idea of reciprocity to life in a piece of creative?
Mm.
You can do the same idea. I just need you to riff. I need you to get up on a whiteboard and start coming up with ideas. And the whole point of it, Nick, is to take subjectivity out of the creative process, where, or as much, especially in the evaluation process, where you're sitting around a room and everyone's talking about this piece of creative, and ultimately the CMO says, I like this version. Why? She looks more ethnic to me. I've heard this stuff. She looks like our brand lover. And may negate the entire campaign that had a lot of like great points, but the CMO is the largest most important person in that room. They all go with that. That's a gut feel. What I want to do is bring behavioral science into it and say, no problem. She looks more like your lover. Let me tell you, in the other campaign, you're missing out on people's desire for social proof, reciprocity. You just now negated the idea that they wanted to have a feeling of security. Let's just make that choice so you know what you're giving up. And that's what I'm trying to do with these blueprints.
That's cool. And yeah, I have a lot of, I do sort of, I've found myself applying my behavioral science work in the marketing world just totally by accident. I don't know how I got there, but I am, and I love it. I like generating copy and working with designers on visual and all these things. And that's, if I had to say, that's probably my favorite collaboration with people is, I'd say I have two. It's with data scientists, really smart, like data scientists, and then, like machine learning, and then with creatives on the marketing side, because it's just such a, I don't know, if you have the right person, like you said, you can just riff so many, if they're open and willing, to discuss and to hear your views. And if you're equally as open to hear their, because, theirs are just as valid. And they're like, when it comes to visual and design, like I am horrible. I have some ideas, but like putting it into practice, like I can't draw a stick figure. Like it's pitiful. So it's good collaboration.
Well, the best creatives already intuitively know all this stuff. They just didn't have a vocabulary.
Exactly.
They just didn't. And now they have a vocabulary. They can fight for their ideas now because they intuitively know it's important to show a lot of people interacting with the brand. But now when I call it social proof, it sounds more scientific, but they didn't have that vocabulary. So now they have the vocabulary to go fight for their beliefs.
So do you think, like, if you go to like corporate America or Fortune 500s and you have your creative department, or within marketing, let's say, is there an acceptance or is there a resistance? I've heard both, but the way that you sort of framed it there, that it gives them a bit of credence to their already existing ideas and legitimates them all, to what they've already thought. Do you think it's going to change and help them in their work, or are they going to push back and say, I'm a creative, this is art, this is subject, it's based on subjectivity, and get out of here, science?
Yeah, there's two answers. The first answer is here's what I've noticed. The older the creative, the longer they've been in the world of creative, the more resistant they are, because they've been successful without using the sciences, right? The second part would be that at first, in almost every engagement, there's an initial resistance, because it's like, well, who are you? Are you putting me in a box? So the way I get around that is say, first off, intuitively, all this stuff. I'm just providing the vocabulary. And the second thing I do is that say, this is just an overlay to what you naturally would have done. We never start off with, at least, and I have my own copywriter and creative director. We never start off with a blueprint. We never start off a creative idea with the science. What I do is I say, the brand, what's right. If you're a good creative, you know intuitively, instinctually what's going to work. Mm-hmm. What I then is take a look at that idea but run it through my model to say, I know your intuition tells you this, but could we tweak this? And when people hear about tweaking my idea, and you're telling me I'm going to get better results, and frankly, creatives are being held accountable like never before at the executional level. So I think they're more open to it, but you have to start off by saying, my job here is not to change anything what you're doing. My job is to overlay my science on top of what you already are doing well, to just give you a little bump. And when I do that, there's much less resistance.
That's cool. That's very helpful. Yeah, thanks for that. Excellent. So thank you for so clearly explaining what is in the book, and how it all works. And I really do recommend listeners get a hold of it and read it. It's
Great, thank
it's a
you.
very easy read.
It is.
I mean, it's just a no brainer for anyone who's in that space, or anyone for that matter, if you're not necessarily within marketing. So let's couple more things, if you don't mind, if you have
Let's do it.
the time. So I heard that you recently have this applied behavioral economics certificate program at Texas A&M, and with some other fine folks in our field. Can you tell
Yeah.
listeners a bit about that if they haven't heard yet?
It is. Yeah, it just started actually this last semester. So I live here in Dallas, Texas, and just south of here in College Station, Texas A&M University is down there, and it's my alma mater. And I just was doing I was doing a presentation for my alma mater, and somebody told me, "Hey, listen, upstairs there's this laboratory that does what you're talking about." And I go, "Nah, no, they don't. I don't think they do." And he goes, "I think they do." And so I went upstairs. He took me upstairs, and I noticed they have this human behavioral lab at Texas A&M. It's the world's largest human behavioral lab, which really means they're testing creative and doing lots of different academic studies using behavioral economics and neuroscience. And so we got to talking about 2 years ago saying, the problem with this stuff is it's stuck in academia, and there's so many people out there that could benefit if we could they don't want to get a PhD in, behavioral economics. What they do want to do is do better marketing. And so we collaborated together with university professors there. We've actually brought in Melina Palmer over from the Brainy Business, and we created a program that you can go to right now and get a certificate after about 18, about a year. Depends on how many electives you want to take. In 18 months, you get certified as an applied behavioral economist. So think about the Yale program that I hear great things about the Yale program.
Mm-hmm.
What this is trying to do is take people who've gone to the Yale program and say, okay, you can now use this program, but go to another university to get a certificate and purely focus on application. So my book, if my book is very application. I'm not trying to make a PhD out of anybody. Similar program. It's supposed to bring anybody into the program. So we have sales guys from Maker's Mark, for instance, in the program right now because they want to become better salespeople. They're not there to learn all about the, a typical sales guy. They just want to get a sale and do it in a way that's more intuitive and faster. And they're using the program for that. So it's at Texas A&M University. Go to the Human Behavior Lab, and there's a whole course load of really quick video-based courses and live courses. And after 18 months, you get a certificate.
It's awesome. Congrats on that.
Thank you.
That's really cool. So what? And I suspect if we can just dive in a little bit more, because I suspect listeners will be really interested in that. What courses is it structured around courses, and what sort of courses are offered exactly?
There are. So we're still building courses, and we want feedback. In fact, you start off with 3 core courses. There's basically think of it as Behavioral Economics 101. There is a course on experimental design. Even though that sounds very academic, it's going to be much more around how to do just experiments to understand what easy back of the envelope experiments, I guess, to help a sales guy, help a marketer, kind of test out ideas. And then I have my course, which is behavioral marketing. There are going to be electives like behavioral sales. There's going to be a course on actually just well-being, because Melina has a passion for well-being and how do you goal set. So it's an elective, but it's something you can do, and it's going to be a shorter course. Think of it as almost as a master class. It's not going to be 9 weeks. It's going to be more or less maybe 5 hours of video on how to do goal setting. So that'd be really great for people on January 1st. And the idea is you have to take the 3 core classes, the curriculum, and there's tests and everything else that come with that. But then a number of electives, and we're building out the course content. I think we have about 9 different courses right now, but we're going to let the market decide what resonates and what doesn't.
Very cool. Very cool. I did a lot of teaching, and I've sort of taken a step back in the last 2 years, and I must say I miss it. And so when I was teaching at Toronto, I was doing cross-cultural psych, which students loved, and then I was doing emotions, and then philosophy of psychology, and I loved all 3 of those. And then I was sort of not by my own choosing, but I was basically forced to teach experimental methods, and I love it. I'm like, yeah, this is great. Like I love it. Undergrad students do not. That was the hardest course to like convince that it's cool to talk about like control conditions and experimental conditions and like your manipulation and independent variable and dependent variable. Like I could go on and on about that stuff, but yeah, that was the one that I was like pulling teeth for these
Well, yeah,
kids.
we'll have to do a post that because I think that class gets the first time it's going to be taught is next semester. That'd be an interesting one because these guys are not even students. These are a lot of people are just from the business world, and so we're gonna see how well it does. Maybe it'll go well, and maybe it won't. But it's an important part of what we have to do at this
Totally,
point.
totally. What I found, because then I had to do it a second and a third time, what I found it got it a little bit better for students was just example after example
Yeah.
and doing this was easier when we could meet in person in a lecture hall. I would run like faux experiments and sort of uh, trick them into thinking it was they were doing one thing when in fact there was a whole cover story and like this half of the class was condition A and this half of the class was condition B. And then I'm like, aha, I fooled you kids. You were just part of an experiment, which worked for like the first 3 weeks. And then by the fourth week, they're like, yeah, obviously you're trying to dupe us again.
Yeah.
So,
Get the street test on it.
very cool. Well, congrats again on that. And my final question for you, Will, is the BBB or the Big Behavioral Brainstorm, which I ask everyone at the end of the show. So of all of the problems, issues in the world today, which one do you think could stand to gain from a behavioral, psychological, motivational related insight?
Yeah, I just had a similar conversation yesterday with somebody, so I'm going to bring this up because it's more top of mind. I'm going to go inequality, but maybe not the way you're thinking. So I know there's a lot of inequality here in the States with whether it's racial injustice or income and gender gaps and things like that. I'm actually really focused right now because of COVID, is the inequality of small businesses, how they are struggling. Like there's some estimates that 30% of all restaurants
Mm,
will go out of business this year.
mm,
And every one of these restaurants is somebody's, like that was their dream. That they put everything into it. They maxed their credit cards because they had a recipe for a kick-ass pizza that they thought that they could go and just provide for their family and their employees. And the fact of the
mm,
matter is that COVID has hurt them so much and they don't know how to be a great marketer. And so because of that, their business is going to go out. They're going to go out of business. And that hurts me because there's so much in the world that people like me understand about how to make their pizza place just be able to compete against the Domino's and the Pizza Huts of the world. So I think for me right now, leveling the playing field
mm,
of taking the small guy, giving him a couple of these behavioral science principles to just keep them running during times when they're competing against the massive advertising spend of a Domino's or the massive advertising spend of a beverage company. And in my book, Marketing Mindstates, I think I have a whole story for sure about Wicked Crisps. And the reason why I'm passionate about that is I saw and I worked with a small company called Wicked Crisps using these things. And now they're one of the fastest growing snack brands in the entire country.
mm,
And they have no marketing. They have very little money. It's a 20-man operation, but they're competing against the Frito-Lays of the world. Why? Is because I'm hopefully at least some of my stuff is helping them. And to me, it's that we can help small businesses. Nick, the small business entrepreneur is going to be the economic middle class of the future. It's not going to be manufacturing. It's going to be entrepreneurs who get out there. And the hardest thing an entrepreneur has to do is compete against these massive companies. And I used to work for one of them that can squash. They get rid of competition very easily by dropping a coupon in your area and you just went out of business. We
mm,
got to help these companies survive and thrive. And that to me right now is like my passion with my writing on LinkedIn and
mm.
Forbes. I'm always trying to give real estate agents, the restaurant, the financial planner, some ideas to get their marketing and their business kind of give them momentum.
Mhm. That's great, and a noble pursuit, and yeah, kudos because I think it's sorely needed. It always has been, but
Yep.
especially now with COVID, as it's laid bare all the inequities and inequalities in every domain, including
Yep.
commerce and business. And like you said, that is somebody's life, that is somebody's sort of passion, and that's their how they provide for their family, and it's sad to hear. And I know it's also top of mind for probably a lot of people with Facebook and Twitter and Amazon and Apple, the big tech in the news. I think they're
Sure.
fine. I don't think because those guys are untouchable, but I heard there's some stuff going on at sort of policy level and legislative action to control the monopolistic hold that these big players have.
Yep.
Good. That was excellent. So thanks, Will. Thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it. It's been, a long time coming, but really enjoyed our conversation. So thanks so much.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate you.
Hey, Nick here once more. A final farewell note before ending. All the show notes, links to papers, resources, and materials mentioned in this episode can be found on the BS podcast page of The Behaviorist, where you can find all episodes and lots of other interesting and easy to apply sciencey stuff. Just head on over to www.behaviorist.biz/BS podcast. The show is edited and co-produced by Laura Christine and Noel Rain, and visual artwork, banners, and animated GIFs created by the talented Iris Deng of dengit.org. That's DENGIT.org. Definitely go and check it out. Lastly, if you'd like to join me in the mission of spreading the good BS word, remember to rate and review the show on iTunes or wherever else you get your podcast fix. Quite a bit of work goes into these episodes, and a little love would go a long way. Thanks again for listening. Until next time, remember, keep your facts ugly and your hypotheses beautiful.